to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their campers, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine, and we need to help each other bring our very best. Before we get started with our topic today, we'd like to do some introductions. So Beth, will you please start us off?
I am Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. I was a camp director for 15 years, but I'm now a camp consultant. And my big passion is really intentional leadership training and building supportive community.
Great, thanks. And Gabrielle?
Well, my name is Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro. Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada, and we focus on creating a positive female community.
And I'm Ruby Compton. I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors, which just is a fancy way to say that I am self-employed. I work as a freelance camp person in the Western North Carolina area during the summer times, and then support camps all across the world throughout the rest of the year. So today's topic is keeping it drama-free, even when the world is drama. And Beth, will you tell us a little bit more about why we chose this topic?
Yes, absolutely. We're recording this as North America goes into its second week of self-isolation. And like you, we are struggling with strain and anxiety and uncertainty. So the topic of not letting your staff get sucked down the drama drain when things are uncertain at camp and when difficulties arise and when we're living through a lot of stress seemed really pertinent. It's also an incredibly important topic to think about, plan for, and discuss so that we're always taking the best care of our people.
Thanks so much, Beth. So here it is, the sky is falling, and that could be on a global scale or even on a very, very personal scale. How do we get our staff to check that drama at the camp gate and keep camp as drama-free as possible? And we're going to start with Beth today.
So, I'm going to start with saying that we need to build a healthy community of trust and cooperation. I think I start pretty much every podcast that way, but I'm going to point you to other episodes we recorded specifically about building community. I'm also aware that Camp Waro does a great job of teaching their staff how to communicate their feelings and talk with one another, so I'm going to leave that piece to Gabs. I want to approach this topic from a front-loading position. Shocking, I realize. But I think it's important to think about why drama surfaces at camp. What are its causes? So when I started to think about that, I thought of stress, lack of sleep, exhaustion from very different days and levels of participation that most of our staff are not used to during the school year. And of course, like very little, if any, privacy. But also particularly with resident camps, we have taken away and for good reason, their ability to be a voyeur into other people's drama, like TV shows or movies or Instagram or Snapchat and so on. And there are a lot of people out there who enjoy watching drama unfold. So think of the popularity of all those shows like Big Brother and The Bachelor and so on. And now they have very little time for them to watch. So for many of our staff, creating their own drama can also take the place of that. For me, drama is, and I had to put this succinctly, an evil beast that just keeps growing until it has destroyed everything or until it itself is slain. So our job as knights is to create communities where we keep all the above reasons for drama in mind and figure out ways to head them all off at the pass. So what I would do is get my leadership team together before the summer starts and make a list of all the reasons they believe drama occurs at camp. And then they may have some of the same ones I did, but they also, of course, will have ones of their own. And now I would put them into pairs or small groups and assign each group one reason to deal with. So ask them then to come up with ways to prevent this drama disease from spreading. For example, if one of the groups is dealing with stress, then what can you put into place each week, each day at camp for your staff so that stress doesn't build and build and build? What are some ways you can help them stay rested and feel in control? So they may come up with things on their list like create fun ways to be sure people are hydrated or eating healthy options or having a few moments of quiet time each and every day. How would that work? What would it take for your leadership team to provide it for everybody? Maybe once a week they create a spa for counselors and frontline staff. Maybe they have time once a week and they like a special time together, and they run this 2 or 3 times each week to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to go, where staff just get to play together, to laugh, to sing, to dance, without campers there that they have to supervise. So whatever helps them to sort of lower those stress levels. Another team could be looking at maybe what other forms of entertainment you can provide your staff that's not all about other people's real drama, but will help to give those people who need it that fix. So why not create a team to produce your own soap opera? Each day or every few days, members of that team could film a 3-minute video that's all about pretend drama with crazy scenarios that always end on a cliffhanger. And it gives people something to talk about, to try to figure out future plot developments, etc., in the days between airings. And you could do this, if you didn't want to record it, as a skit or a magazine article or a radio show. However you decide to do it, it's entertaining, and then it can give folks something to talk about that has no consequences on the health of your real community. You could even create teams for each of your categories. Name them fun, creative names, get them costumes, theme songs, whatever you like. The point for me is being intentional now about drama prevention, so it will help to limit the number of times during the summer that it rears its ugly little head. And if you're creating these teams and telling your entire staff about it and sharing the reasons behind what you're doing, and you're naming it for what it is and putting it out there in the minds of everyone that you are working hard to combat this for them, then they can help do their part to keep the drama down. So I'd start thinking about it now.
Awesome. So many great ideas. Thanks so much, Beth. Gabs, what would you add to Beth's suggestions?
I would say that one of the things to understand when it comes to quote unquote drama is that this happens usually in the dissatisfaction stage of your team coming together. And so, like, a lot of us know that the orientation stage at the very beginning, everybody's walking on eggshells. They're on their best behavior. They want their bosses to like them. They want their peers to like them. They don't speak out of turn. They're very polite. And it's like a politeness fest that happens. And then all of a sudden, tension starts to build and tension starts to rise. And this is really when dissatisfaction stage sets in. And that's really when the reality and expectation gap sort of smacks into each other. So this is a really normal thing that happens within all organizations. It's a healthy part of the development. And our goal is to best manage that stage, because what we want is the success of our summer is not going to, it's going to be how we bring our community from that piece to the resolution stage and productivity stage. So just know that this is normal, and also know that during this time, blame is high. So where does that blame go to? Very much so the supervisors. This is where the highest blame happens. And then the second highest form is coworkers. So we know that that there's very little responsibility that is taken, and that's where we need to do the shift. We have to start getting our staff members to take responsibility within those within that part. And so how do we do this? It's not easy. It's complicated. First things first is what Beth talked about. You're going to make your dissatisfaction stage the least painful as possible by front loading the type of job that they're going to have and the expectations of when tough things happen, not if tough things happen, when tough things happen, when you're upset with your teammate or you didn't like a certain program, or et cetera, et cetera. What is your responsibility? What is your role in that? So front loading that piece is really important, because when they don't do it, then when you talk to them about it, you can go back to that one piece and the responsibility goes back onto them. So that's really important. I also like telling my staff members two things. One, I'm not responsible for your happiness. This is very confusing, especially to staff members that were my campers, who I also adore so much. So it's hard for me to say it to them, but I am not responsible for their happiness. If they are unhappy and they're not coming forward and they're not sharing what's making them upset, that's on them and it's not on me. So this is, I think it's part of adulthood. I think it's a good thing. I think being practicing your own happiness is very important. So it's tough to hear, but it's important to hear. The other thing that I say is, I'm not part of your community. The reality is that I don't eat necessarily with my staff every single day. I usually walk around the dining room. I don't sleep in their cabins. I do socialize, but I am a part of them. And so if there's toxicity within the organization or within the community, that's up to them to bring forward. I'm there to support them. And it's good that I'm not part of their community. I'm as close to them as possible. But of course, the conversation shifts when I enter the room. And so putting that responsibility also on them. I'm always a support person to them. That's, I make clear. And I'm somebody that's there to problem solve. But when it comes to it, it's up to them to come forward. So first, understand that dissatisfaction stage is normal. Second, front loading is extremely important. And then making sure that responsibility is on them and not on you is also very important. Also, just a little side note, a lot of camp directors, because a lot of camp directors are very caring, usually during this stage, what people like to do is sugarcoat things. So getting special treats for staff members or having a special evening for staff members, this is a poor time to do that. You need to resolve the dissatisfaction that is happening. And then once everything is calmed down, then you can start building those things. But just trying to make people feel good with superficial things won't work. Superficial stuff will really work afterwards, and they'll actually truly appreciate it.
Rock on. More great suggestions. Thanks so much, Gabs. I'll offer here a couple of pieces. You know, we've talked about during staff training, you want to make sure you are front loading and encouraging the staff to make a commitment to one another that there won't be drama. You as the boss can all day long sit there and say, we want to have a drama-free staff, but until your staff are owning that, you're going to have drama. And I would say, rarely do camps have zero drama over the course of a summer. And so you can generally find a returning staff member who may be willing to talk about some of the effects that drama has on the camp community. And it's not even always gossip and staff stuff. Like, I think about how many times I've had to shut down games of Assassin or whatever you call it, where the staff are like, it's session 4, like we're 3/4 of the way through summer, we're just gonna do this fun staff game and we're gonna, be running around and like squirting each other with water guns or whatever the task is and see who wins. And I've had to shut that down multiple times and explain that our focus is on the kids, and I want you to have a good time, and there's a lot of appropriate ways to do so, but this is not one. And I've been a total buzzkill over that several times because every year it comes up as like, this is a great idea and we do this at college, but this is a different environment. And so I think that it's important to find some of those leaders on your staff who've seen some staff drama and can speak to it. And I've spoken about and other times on the podcast about this 4 quadrants activity that I do, where every staff member rotates through these different stations in small groups where you're talking about what expectations do your campers have of you? What expectations do your parents have of you? Not your personal parents, but like the parents of your campers. What expectations do your coworkers have of you? And what expectation does your boss have of you or the directors have of you? And so they spend time working on each of these, brainstorming, writing on a big piece of paper. And inevitably in doing that activity, we'd get to the staff one, and that's where the staff would come up with, I want my coworkers to be drama-free. And so they were the ones bringing that up and talking about it and making that commitment to each other to do so. And I always found that was way more powerful than anything I could ever say. And we always took that piece of paper and hung it up in the staff lounge so that in this place where they wrote, we're going to be drama free, and their handwriting and their check marks next to it because they all agree, that was in a place that the staff frequented so they would be reminded of that commitment throughout the summer. And drama is still going to happen. And so I think the other thing to think about is, like Beth and Gabs have both said, to give them some tools for how to handle it. Give them conflict resolution tools. And when I think about big drama, like people getting fired, big policy breaks that have happened, consider the idea of how you're going to address the drama and then how you're going to problem solve it. So it's kind of like, how are you going to process it and address it? And then how are you going to problem solve and move forward, as almost two separate steps that need a little space in between. And for either one, like there were some situations that where I wanted to address and process it all together, but then we were moving forward. I wanted them to work on that individually before we came together and all talked about it. There are other times I can think specifically of a scenario where I knew that there was a lot of negative energy feeding on each other. And so to process and diffuse that, I had pieces of paper around the room. We had questions. It was a quiet reflection time, and people went around and individually wrote stuff on pieces of paper. And then we came together and problem solved what was in front of us. So do think about those group dynamics. And sometimes it is one against the army. And so that may be a situation where you want to kind of spread out that processing and that addressing and like letting people diffuse the steam a little bit. You may want to try to have that not be kind of so much of the mob mentality where everybody's looking at you and you're at the front of the room and they're like, you're totally wrong, right? Because that stuff happens. It happens at camp and it happens when you're supervising folks. So think about that we want to process and address the problem, and then probably separately look at problem solving and fixing it and figuring out what our path forward is. That those are really two separate steps. They can happen one right after the other, but the dynamics of the team and the group and how that's done, it does need to be set up as kind of two separate steps. Don't try to do it all at once. All right, Beth, do you have some more ideas on this?
Yes. As Ruby has just said, one of the ways to address drama is to do a session on it during training. So I'm going to just give you my little take on it, which is slightly different from Ruby. So just give you another couple of ideas that you can choose from. But I always encourage directors to put issues like this, issues that address how we act and support each other in community, out into the minds of our people. So during training, I would put my staff into small purposeful groups, ones that I had made myself, so I knew who was in them, and then ask them to have discussions about the ways in which drama can affect your camp culture. So front load by letting them know that we don't want to talk specifics about drama that has happened in the past. We don't want to gossip, and the details are not what's important in the discussion. But what you're looking for is how that kind of drama and living through it made people feel. So as Ruby said, return staff especially will have a lot to say about how it may have affected one of their past summers or how it made them feel. Again, we're not going into details, but even those who are your staff for the very first time will have had experiences at school or in their families or communities that can help them share how drama made them feel. So have that opportunity after small group discussion for a large group debrief, and then put them back into small groups to brainstorm solutions. So once you've shared all of these, I would either ask your staff as a whole, but it might be too big a job to give to that many people, or give it to a small committee of folks who are linguists and who love language to work on it and report back in a day or so with a code created of how drama will be handled at camp this summer. So as Ruby said, I'm just making this a little bit more official, is get it in writing, post it everywhere, and have your staff sign it. You may even want to get them all to put like one hand on their heart and one raised in solidarity and read that code aloud together as a promise to care for one another. But as this session ends, front load, that you understand that drama is a thing, but that you are incredibly serious about not letting it affect the positive and supportive community that you're creating together. So tell them up front, you know that some of them love drama. For some, it just seems to follow them everywhere. Some people really feel needed when there's drama. They like to help. Some just like to be in the know about the rumors and the gossip. But regardless of why we enjoy it or put up with it, we need to figure out a way to ensure we don't bring it into our culture. So this is your chance then at the end of this session to reiterate your mission, your objectives for your campers, your goals and purpose, and how drama doesn't belong at camp. You also need to let them know it will not be tolerated, and then you need to follow through when that happens. So too often I hear camp directors complain about all the drama at camp, but they don't actually do anything about it. They just tell me this is a problem. But if it becomes a real problem and you've talked with the person or the persons involved multiple times and you've given them multiple chances to change behavior and it's still happening, you really need to think about next steps and whether or not you keep them on staff or let them go. And they need to hear before the summer starts how serious you are about keeping it out of camp and how much it is their responsibility to do so. I have a really quick story. One year, Travis, who is my husband and was my co-director, was trying to get our staff to stop singing a song at campfire, but only because he didn't like it. And so he started a rumor that Topaz, that's me, my camp name, had banned it. And everybody knew it was a joke, but then people started to use the phrase, oh, I heard Topaz banned that for whatever they didn't want, like a song to be sung or a game to be played or whatever. I even heard somebody say, I heard Topaz banned raisins and cookies because that person didn't particularly like raisins. So it was all a big joke, but I decided to use this as my way into the no drama discussion that particular training. And I sat them all down in a big circle and I told them that Topaz has banned drama this year. And everybody laughed, but I told them I was actually serious. And then we ran the session. We did scenarios about what to do when drama arose and how to handle it and give some suggestions and some techniques and ways in which to handle it. But at the end of each skit, everybody chanted in unison, Topaz banned drama. And what I then heard throughout the summer was people actually using that phrase. So when somebody started complaining or trying to share a rumor, people would say to each other, I heard Topaz banned drama this year. So it was just a little thing, but it worked well to help keep people focused on what we were trying to do and why. And it gave them, that staff of that year, a bit of language to say, to shut it down before it all started. One other thing, in any real situations of drama, like you're having a huge staffing issue, perhaps a number of people have been fired all at once, or a death has occurred within your community, not at camp, but maybe somebody that everybody knew or loved. Maybe there's a natural disaster, you have days and days of power outages. Whatever it is, in that kind of drama, you have to show real leadership. Staff need to be given as much information as you can possibly give them. They need it in a timely fashion and they need it regularly. They need to be told why. Maybe you can't tell them all the details. They need to feel like you're in control and that you have their backs. Trying to shelter them from all worry during these kinds of times, as I've seen many directors try to do, only seems to make room for people to talk amongst themselves and for fear to bury itself under the skin and panic and rumors to get on the move. You have to sit down with them daily at minimum during these kinds of times, be honest, answer their questions as best as you possibly can, show you're doing all you can to make it work out, and give them as much detail as you are able. You have to keep them in the loop and let them know what their layers of support are during difficult times, if they're any different than the people they've known since the beginning of the summer, who are the people they're supposed to go to when they're in need. So please keep those lines of communication open and honest when you're dealing with serious drama, because it will make a difference.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thanks so much, Beth. Gabs, what would you add to this?
I think I'm really happy that Beth brought up staff members, if they're, for me, it's drama is people, sometimes you're sucked into it and you're part of it and you don't know how to get out. And sometimes you're stirring the pot. And I think with those that are stirring the pot, you really do need to assess and see if this is the right place for them. And what I like to do and so I'm happy that Beth is saying, you really do need to assess, because it's not appropriate within your organization to do such a thing, because we're working with children, because we're trying to be role models, and because we're trying to be better than what society has sort of taught us. Camps are trying to be the role models within our communities. And so what I like to do is, after a scenario or a situation has happened, maybe between two staff members or a couple or a situation, I like to talk to the staff member and I like to ask them, in hindsight, what would they have done differently? And then they'll tell me, and then I ask them, what stopped you from doing that the first time? And then they respond with, I didn't know if you'd actually listen, or you seemed really busy, or I thought I'd get in trouble, or I thought I'd make things worse, whatever the answer was. And then I said, well, now that we're establishing trust together, what my expectations is that you come to me much, much sooner, or that you go to your whoever much, much sooner. And usually they're really on board. I find most people 9 times out of 10 rather that scenario than the ones that are stirring the pots. And the ones that are stirring the pots, I'm very clear with them. This is what you're doing. You're stirring the pot. This is not acceptable, and this won't fly another time. And I'm letting them know. And if it does happen again, then they're no longer working within our organization, because it's making it an emotionally unsafe environment, because it means that you can't be yourself, because you never know what somebody's going to say about you. And, this is, not a secret, 15 years ago within our organization, I think we were fairly good at creating a wonderful community for our campers, but our staff members did not have a positive community. It was quite toxic. And that's when my folks took over the camp, and they purchased the camp. And I remember that first year after they purchased the camp, how toxic the camp was. And I've told this story many, many times, but just to recap, at the end of the summer, I had to really think, do I want to continue working here? It was so unpleasant. And there was a lot of aggression, passive aggressiveness, but there was also so little lack of responsibility. And so I just made a decision. I want to come back, but I have to change how we do things. And like I talked about a lot, I brought in certain staff members to talk about how can we shift what we need to shift. And one of the things that we did was we needed to come up with a program that required staff members to be responsible to make our community better than it is. And we came up with the ACT program. And the ACT program starts, the acronym is simple. It's awareness, communicate, and together. So awareness of an issue or a feeling, communicate to somebody that can help. That's really important. And together, let's problem solve. And the communicate piece is really key, because communicate doesn't mean you're going to your supervisor. It means also, maybe your supervisor is a little intimidating to you because you're 17 years old and you've known that person since you were 6 years old. So maybe going to your best friend Ruby and Beth and saying, I really need to go talk to Gab, but I'm very nervous. And they're like, don't worry, we'll go with you. So, going to somebody that can help you get to that step. And then together we problem solve, because a lot of times staff members come to you and say, this is an issue. And they sort of put their hands up and say, you deal with it. And it's like, no, we're going to do this together. And for me, that's wonderful because it builds trust. And so this is something that we've been working on for the past 15 years. As I say, it's a work in progress. It's not perfect. But I can tell you that the new staff members that we present this to in our interview process, are very keen and very excited to practice the ACT program. And our returning staff year after year come back and say, man, when I think I know how to use ACT, I realize I still am learning how to do it. But holy moly, my classmates need to learn how to use ACT. My new people that I teach with need to learn how to use ACT. Because what it really is saying, hey, I'm a little bit upset about this. I don't know who to go see. You go see a friend. A friend says, let's go together. And then the 3 or the 4 of you come up with a solution. The person that you go see it in the communication piece, the rule of thumb is they're not somebody that's going to judge somebody else. They're somebody that's your friend, and they're not there to judge. They're just there to support you to get to the next step. And this has been really, really helpful within our organization, because it's all about front loading. We know that this is what's expected, and this is a skill that we are learning and we are practicing within our organization. Working with people is very, very complicated, and it's complex. But when you set the expectations with your staff members at the beginning, then it's easier to have them reach that goal. If you set it at the halfway point, it's so much harder. And so whatever communication skills that you decide to go with, make sure you are setting that up at the beginning. And remember, no gossip is not sustainable. because people need to share their feelings, or they need to share their dissatisfaction. So where can your staff members share their dissatisfaction? How do they know it's safe? And how are your leadership team members trained in supporting them in doing that?
Love it. I love it so much. It's great. So here's just a little tidbit. Hey, Beth, did you know that someone told me you sound like an owl?
Who?
Right? So whenever we use that phrase, someone told me, you are asking for drama, asking for it. So we want to try to prevent there being owls all over your camp, because that's what happens, right? I think about when a staff member comes to me and said, hey, I saw so-and-so doing this behavior. And you're like, they need to be told not to do that behavior. Do you go up to that person and say, hey, someone told me that you weren't wearing a shirt at the lake today, and you know that everybody has to wear a shirt at the lake today? And what that person is hearing is, somebody ratted me out. I want to find out who it is. And they're going to spend all their energy doing that instead of just putting on a shirt like they were supposed to. So as a director, some responses I have to that, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, someone is doing this thing, and I'm seeing the situation where I'm going to have to go up to them and say, someone said that blah, 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 blah. One question I'll ask back is, well, did you tell them? And they, for whatever reason, may or may not have. They may not have felt comfortable. They may not have realized they could tell them that. It could be a staff member who's much older than they are, has a lot more seniority. And I understand that. But also that there are opportunities within camp for us to educate and share one another and hold each other accountable. And we have a culture of accountability, and it's okay that if you see someone doing something unsafe, you can totally say something about it. And if someone's like, I feel really uncomfortable talking to them about this, then I would try to put myself in a position or make it really obvious that another leadership team member has put themselves in a position to see this behavior occur. So if they always are at the lake and they always take their shirt off, even though the rule is everybody has to wear a shirt at the lake, then I'm going to make sure that one of my leadership team members, or I just happen to be walking by the lake at this time. Now, sometimes that's a little harder to achieve. And if there really isn't a way for me to get to see that behavior happening, then that's when I'll really lean into the staff member and be like, hey, do you feel comfortable going and having a conversation about this? Because if I butt my nose in here and say, well, somebody said this, then they're going to get really caught up in who said it. And whereas if you can just go and say, hey, I saw this going on, it made me uncomfortable, or, I saw this going on and the policy is this, we need to set a good example for other folks. Then that's actually going to create a way more drama-free situation. It may not feel like that to them, but often I found when I explained it that way, people kind of got it. We're like, oh, okay, yeah, don't stick your nose in this. Let me go try to handle it myself. And often that goes better than they expect that it's going to. So thank you, Beth, for playing along with my little joke. I appreciate it. So consider that, and anytime you feel yourself leaning towards those words, someone told me, just don't try to find another route. And then the other thing that I want to offer is to consider offering some training on boundaries, because when we can communicate boundaries well, I think that prevents big drama from happening. It may still be little drama, it may still be some conflict, but I like to tell folks that when we, especially with kids, right, when we tell them what the rules are, where the boundaries are, what the expectations are, it's a lot more likely that kids are going to go knock up on the wall, not just like kicking doors down because they don't know where the boundaries are. So think about, and there's some great podcasts that are out there in the relationship world right now, but also in the workplace. Boundaries are very much a buzzword that people are exploring. And I think spending a little time talking about how do we talk about boundaries, and this idea that I heard on a podcast that a relationship is really about the space between you and me. And so let's work together to define what that space looks like and how we want to interact in it. And even just setting up that expectation that that's part of being here at camp, is learning how to operate in each other's spaces and define what those boundaries are, then that pushes your staff to articulate and communicate rather than assuming, which we talked about in the last episode. And I think will help folks approach some of that stuff more logically rather than so emotionally. The last little piece I'll throw in there is a reminder of something that was said at the Women in Camp Summit by Jane Sanborn this last year, where she said, anytime that emotions get involved, it should not be done over text or email. So as soon as you start to feel a conversation getting to an emotional place, pick up the phone, say, hey, we need to talk about this later. But those should never be carried out via text, because there's just way too much emotional stuff and nonverbal cues that get missed and assumptions that end up happening when we're trying to navigate those conversations via text without seeing the person. Even getting on like FaceTime or Skype is better than trying to angrily type out whatever it is you're feeling. So consider that as well. All right. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today's episode?
Yeah, I think if I was to avoid certain sparking of drama situations, is to train your staff members in assess and then deploy. So when a staff member or a camper comes to you that's really upset about something, that you're not reacting, you need to put on your little Sherlock Holmes hat and go and figure out all of the pieces together, and then deploy certain actions. And just to understand that we are creatures that mirror each other. And so when people are upset, we feel very, very upset. So when somebody's really hurt, we feel very hurt or protective. And so not to react, and just to find out the entire story. And so I teach my leadership team members, assess first, deploy later. The same with maybe the staff member that doesn't have a shirt down at the waterfront. Perhaps they lent their shirt to somebody else and they put on sunscreen instead. We don't know. And so we're just going to go and find out what the situation is. So assess and deploy. And that I find helps and calms things down too. Running a camp is an emotional ride, and we are sort of the conductors. So we need to be as even keeled as possible, and just know that you are going to get through it, and just taking pauses and moments to yourself is going to be very helpful to calm your own emotional situation.
I think we can also take a lesson from the movie Apollo 13 and the fact that they really were in really big trouble. And what they did, because they had done all this training and they'd run all these scenarios and they'd tried all of these different things, they were prepared for disaster to strike. And I'm not saying that all drama is disaster, but when it hit the fan, what they did was they just solved the problem. They worked the problem, I believe was the phrase that kept getting used. And even the people in Florida who were working on it from their angle to try to get them home, everything was just about work the problem. So when stuff does arise, if we can teach our staff to work the problem instead of getting caught up in all the feelings of it, I think that might help as well. So maybe you could watch that as a movie during staff training and talk about the lessons learned there, but definitely work the problem, because they just didn't get caught up in the moment with all the feelings. They're very important feelings, but they need to be processed at the right time.
Yeah, I love that. I think I remember a summer where I had new leadership team members. They were of Camp Waro, but they were new. They were like second year staff members, but they were amazing. And I did put them in leadership team roles. And I think that some of our other staff members didn't feel like they earned their years, like earned that position. It was very frustrating to me, because these young women were and are fantastic. But there was still this underbelly of, I deserve or other people deserve, which I despise that sort of mentality. And it just started to get so bad that everything was blamed on leadership team. Everything was wrong, which it wasn't. It was a great summer. And so I realized I had to do something, because the mob, as you said, Ruby, was taking over. And no matter what I did or small conversations, it was spreading like a wildfire. And even new staff members were like, yeah. And I was like, you've been here for 16 days. Like, it doesn't make, what are you talking about? And so I divided all of the staff members into little groups. And I had leaders of each group, and I chose those leaders, and I picked those groups as well, and no leadership team members were in their groups. They were doing something else. Now, this was right after mid-camp, so they left, they had their mid-camp, and then they came back. So we didn't have campers, so I had that luxury of doing it. But if I didn't have that, I would have done it in the evening. And I had a leader and I was very clear of what I wanted each group to talk about. So I had divided camp into different categories, so they couldn't just harp on one thing. And then each leader came and chatted with me, and they had their flip chart of what all the staff said. And when it came down to when I had the 5 leaders and they went through everything, it was just like, what we were saying is that some people just repeat the same thing over and over in different ways. And so there's 3 main issues. 1, why was this the leadership team? 2, could we have more staff, like fun times? And 3 was literally a meal issue that had nothing to do with them. So when I finally listened and I said, these seem to be like the 3 main pieces, everybody was a little bit shameless and said, oh yeah, this is what it is. And I said, okay, so how are we going to communicate this to the rest of the staff? What are we going to do? Sometimes the mob gets away from you, and it's ridiculous. We had a beautiful August, and it was a shameful July, but it was a beautiful August, and we lived and learned from that. And we also talked about how, yes, we've been around for so many years. That does not entitle anybody to any position. You'll always merit a position. And those young women that were leadership team, I told them they had to really earn their stripes in August and really not give anybody an excuse to complain. And they did it, and they were role models for those girls. So, sometimes it happens no matter the front loading that you do, but just breaking it down, isolating the issues, dealing with the issues can really help.
All such wise words. Thank you both for everything you shared today. And Gabs, it is time for the recap. Recap.
All right. So, as usual, front loading is super important, my friends. And you know what Beth had said? I think she has a good point. Pretend that there's drama. Let the drama come out. Let's do a little bit of creative theater if we want. This is fun, and it's good games as long as we're talking about our expectations with our staff members at the very beginning and what we expect and what we're going to do when this stuff happens. And we can create a code. We must do sessions during staff training, and we have to talk about it, of course, during our interview process. That's very important. Also really important to remember that Topaz hates raisins, and she's also an owl. Let's talk about expectations when it comes to campers, parents, coworkers, and boss. When we let staff members know that other people are looking in, that helps them with their own behavior. Assess and deploy is something that you might want to teach your leadership team members so they don't react to staff members' high energy. Also, we want to define the space that happens in between each other. Bring in boundaries. Also talk about caring language, how to be kind, how to treat one another, how you want to be treated, and that maybe this is what you did outside of camp, but within camp, we're trying something new, and together we're trying to do that together to create a better space for our staff members so that we're role modeling for our campers. Transparency when big events happen is also key. Bring your staff members in on the circle, in on the information, and trust them like adults, and that will also reduce any gossiping and perhaps some drama. We also maybe would like to look at the movie Apollo 13. I'm sort of into it. I probably will be watching that tonight. This is something that's normal that happens at camps. Our goal is that you talk about it beforehand, so that when it does happen, you let your staff member know that it will happen, that they're equipped and ready, and that your leadership team is equipped and ready to manage it. Please do not hide underneath a blanket while this happens. Face it head on. That's the best way to deal with it. And then afterwards, everybody gets ice cream.
Perfection. Thanks so much, Gabs. And we want to invite you to get involved with the podcast. You can join us on social media using the hashtag #CampCode and tell us what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests that you recommend that we talk to, any great leadership training tips that you have to share. We'd love to hear from you. because we are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found this podcast to be useful, please leave us a rating and review in your podcast app of choice. One way you can do that is in iTunes. You can go or into the podcasting app of Apple. You can go to camphacker.tv/cc_iTunes, or you can tweet your love of the show by going to camphacker.tv/campcodelove. And your feedback helps other folks find the show and helps keep our show going. So next, we want to make sure you know how to get in touch with us. So Beth, where can folks reach you?
And just to clarify, I really don't understand raisins, but if I am an owl, it's definitely a daytime owl. I don't know if they're only night owls, but I'm no longer a night owl in my old age. You can reach me. Our website is gocamp.pro. I am Beth at gocamp.pro, and I'm on Instagram as Topaz Faye.
Rock on. Gabrielle?
And I love podcasting with these ladies. And you can reach me at Gabrielle Rail on Facebook or on Instagram. And you can check out where I work at ouareau.com, ouareau.com.
Sweet. And you can be in touch with me on Instagram at Ruby Outdoors or at Women in Camping. You can also email me ruby@rubyoutdoors.com or find me on Twitter at rubylyn85. Before we sign off today, we want to make sure you know what is our next podcast that you'll hear coming through the feed. So Beth, will you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We actually verified this before we started recording today. If you've listened to our last episode, we're going to be talking next time about keeping training fun for a multi-generational staff.
Woohoo! It's an audience recommendation also, so get those in. Today for our final segment, we always like to share a best practice for leadership training, and we'd love to hear some of your most memorable moments so we can feature them here on the podcast. You can tell us what they are by sending us an email or telling us on social media using that hashtag #CampCode. And Beth is going to share this week's best practice.
Okay, just a real quick one. How about coming up with an award for folks who made it through the week without succumbing to drama, no matter how hard the week was? Why not let staff nominate fellow staff, call them out for their heroics during a difficult week, and their ability to stay positive and handle it all with professionalism and maturity? You could even get an award which gets passed around. I am suggesting that you purchase a stuffed llama and call it the No Drama Llama. And maybe it's a small one on a keychain or something that staff can wear on their FAC or their first aid kit or their belt loop, or maybe it's a bracelet that says No Drama Llama, whatever. But make it visible, because doing that will also open it up for discussion with campers when they see it and ask about it. And I think if we can show our staff how much we value people handling things in a direct and supportive way, and of course, none of the details of what happened will be talked about when this award is given out, but we can help them honor each other for doing that, for being direct and supportive, and we will be much better off. So No Drama Llama, make it a thing.
Fantastic. I love it so much. The No Problema. That's no problem. Yeah, no problem. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thanks for the listening, friends.